There are women who do not want to sign it. I went out with a woman who said it is fair that a woman has the right to what a man had before marriage. I argued that if she has not been involved from the beginning in what the man has built, it is fair that she does not own it. But she said no. Since they are getting married, it is a lifelong relationship, and they should share everything. I have always felt a mental shock about this. I have dated others who see it as fair. To avoid wasting time while dating, I have tried to talk about it on the first 3 to 5 dates. What is your experience? Story 1. My girlfriend is the one who brought it up. I think it is a good idea and does not say anything about my hope for a relationship until death do us part. I do not buy insurance because I plan to crash my car, but I am definitely happy to have it when I do. Story 2. I know you shouldn't believe every video on the internet, but I saw a lawyer saying that around 90% of people who sign a prenuptial agreement end up staying married. Being able to speak about finances in a mature way is a huge positive sign. Also, if you are worried about your future spouse taking everything, then they probably are not suitable as a life partner. I have discussed this with my fiancé, and if we split, we have agreed on how it will be handled. I know words mean nothing if not written down, but if I did not think she was serious, I would not be marrying her. Story 3. I am going to quote someone from my life. When we get married, we all sign a prenuptial agreement. It can be one you draft for yourself or the one the state sets for you. That perspective always stuck with me. Story 4. My fiancée was the one who wanted a prenuptial agreement. She was taught by her mother to want it. I do not mind it. In the event we separate, the money that her parents put into our house stays with her. That makes sense to me, and I do not plan to ever separate. Even if the worst happens, I am still ahead since I own more than I would have without that initial down payment. I think it is more important to look for a partner who wants to make your life better but sets good boundaries. It is not necessarily about the prenuptial agreement. It is about the person and why they want to be with you. Story 5. My girlfriend brought it up to me. She does well financially and will also be inheriting multiple properties and land one day. I do well on my own, and in the 5 years we've been together, we share all expenses. Money has never once been a debate. She had apparently been wanting to bring this up for a while but was worried about offending me. I'm glad that she eventually did so she can let go of that stress. I have no issue with it. Who am I to come in later in life trying to take a piece of what she either earned or will be given by her family? I say be an adult and take responsibility for yourself. Stop waiting for someone to take care of you. Story 6. My wife and I have the Dutch version of a prenuptial agreement. It is not uncommon here, and it allows for the separation of wealth and possessions. You can also incorporate things like a future business or inheritance. If you adjust the romantic view of marriage just a little, you can see that it is a smart thing to do. Story 7. Mine accepted it without question in the United States. We got divorced 6 years later in Sweden, a country that did not honor the prenuptial agreement. Ironically, that worked to my advantage over the long term. Story 8. I am a woman and I own 2 properties with no mortgage. If I get married, there is no way I will not have him sign a prenuptial agreement. I honestly do not think it is that big of a deal, to be honest. Story 9. I brought it up with my ex-wife. She got defensive, saying that asking for a prenuptial agreement was expecting the marriage to fail. We argued and I gave in. We broke up when she cheated. Thankfully, she did not come after me for alimony or any of the few assets I had. But yes, never again. Now I am with someone I love very much, and there will be a prenuptial agreement when we get married. Story 10. My wife suggested it because she wanted to protect her assets since she is a high earner. I pointed out that while she earns more than I do, I have more assets than she does. Ultimately, our incomes and assets were similar enough that a prenuptial agreement did not really make sense, so we both agreed not to have one. However, she was clearly open to the idea. Story 11. Some have been understanding and agree, while others got offended. I have noticed most, but not all, women who get upset about it usually do not have much going on financially, either in terms of assets or financial knowledge. The way I usually frame it is this: you either make your own prenuptial agreement or you will be using the government's. It would be better if we use ours. Story 12. Get a trust prior to marriage to protect your current assets. For most, that is over half the battle. Story 13. I have had mixed reactions. Some girls consider it a normal part of marriage, while others get upset and say it is too transactional. Story 14. My fiancé was casually talking to his lawyer and mentioned we were getting married. The lawyer said he highly suggested a prenuptial agreement. My fiancé brought it up to me and I agreed. It is not because we do not trust one another, but because we do not trust the government. We started the relationship on our own terms, and if it were to unfortunately end, we want it on our terms as well. Story 15. If you have assets to protect, you need a prenuptial agreement. If the woman does not like it, then that is a red flag. You should consider ending the relationship. The good news is you found out before marriage. I told my wife that a prenuptial agreement guarantees we are marrying for love. She thought about it for a while, then we worked on it together and she signed it. This was the advice my attorney gave me. Furthermore, we would not be discussing a prenuptial agreement unless I had significant assets. So what is wrong with that? A woman who thinks prenuptial agreements are bad may be someone who fears divorce, because most of the details of a prenuptial agreement only matter in the case of divorce. That is another red flag. When I was dating, I discussed a prenuptial agreement by the third to fifth date. There is no reason to remain involved longer if she is against it. Story 16. She knew it was coming, and she also signed postnuptial agreements. She honestly did not care and still does not care. It is 100% about the marriage for her. Story 17. I went out with a woman who said it is fair that a woman has the right to what a man had before marriage. I am not your lawyer and do not know what stake you are in, but this is not how equitable distribution laws work in the overwhelming majority of states. Property owned prior to marriage is generally separate property. She would have no right to things you owned prior to marriage. Story 18. Legally, she is not entitled to what you had before the marriage. Only joint or common assets and wealth accumulated during the marriage are split. For example, I bought my house before my husband and I married. I would keep everything I paid into it up until the marriage. If we split, he would get half of the accumulated value of the house during the time we were married. That is significantly less than half the price of the house. I know this because I went to an attorney to get a prenuptial agreement to protect my assets earned prior to marriage. I will also receive a large inheritance when my father passes, which I want to go to our son for his future if I die. The lawyer bluntly told me that none of that would be on the table, but I could not disinherit him or make unreasonable demands in a prenuptial agreement because it would be overturned in court. So I did not get one. I understand that I can create a trust for my son so the inherited assets go to him at majority, because inheritances are not automatically considered common assets. Story 19. My last ex was the one who wanted it in the first place because it is a simpler process in case the marriage does not work out, which I agreed with. I would not marry someone who thinks they are entitled to everything I have earned or have been gifted, such as inheritance, before they came along, or even my inheritance after we get married. That is just my hard line, although I would approach the discussion more nonchalantly since I would rather get an honest answer than one they think I want to hear. Story 20. It was great. We recognized the necessity for our situation. With the prenuptial agreement, she has family wealth that I have no legal recourse to acquire, and I have a high income that she has no legal recourse to acquire. Both of us benefit financially from each other while we are together, and neither of us benefits if we separate. It is unfortunate that our economic system incentivizes us to date within our economic class, but it does make things orderly when both parties bring a similar amount of wealth to the table. Story 21. I think prenuptial agreements get a really bad reputation, and people seem to forget that they can protect both parties. Women can have assets that they want to protect too. People also forget that marriage, in and of itself, is a legally and financially binding contract, and a prenuptial agreement should just be part of that contract. If it is really love, I hope both parties would want to see each other protected in the event that things do not work out. Story 22. When I was first getting to know my soon-to-be wife, she was against it at first, but I told her that there is always a prenuptial agreement in place. If you do not decide what happens in case of a divorce, the the government does it for you. I also assured her that we would be drafting the prenuptial agreement together and we both get a say in what is included. It will not just be me presenting it to her and expecting her to sign it. Maybe it is a bit different in my case since we are both young and neither of us has really built anything yet. Story 23. I have never met a woman who had a positive reaction to it unless she had experienced loss in a divorce herself. I am part of a multi-generational family endeavor, and when I have mentioned in the past that I would like to exclude that specific aspect from the marriage, they usually react positively because they understand it involves many other people. However, a blanket prenuptial agreement is generally not well received. I got divorced last year, and I will never get married again without a prenuptial agreement. Most likely, I will simply never get married again. Story 24. I would have considered it if my wife and I had any assets worth protecting before getting married. Story 25. I have a dog, and my prenuptial agreement will ensure he stays mine. If they have a problem, then I will have to find someone else. Story 26. One got upset. We did not last. Another was indifferent until her mother started considering divorce. I explained to her all the financial consequences and how they would likely have to split things without a prenuptial agreement. Now she insists on one and we are engaged. Story 27. First 3 to 5 dates? If you are both on the same page so that it does not scare her away, sure, get the non-negotiables out there. Generally, prenuptial agreements are more typical if people have significantly different assets at the beginning of the relationship. These couples tend to be over 30. Not many 25-year-olds have to jealously guard their small retirement accounts. Exceptions are those who have family money. Prenuptial agreements are also common if there are dependents to protect from a previous relationship, or if one person has been divorced before. By far, the biggest indicator of whether someone wants a prenuptial agreement is wealth. Wealthy people protect their money better. It is one reason why they are wealthy. Some people feel that prenuptial agreements are just smart. Others feel the request seems like planning for failure, a slap in the face. It is a personal decision, but it is good that you are talking it out with them. Just make sure you can explain your stance clearly and that you are listening to understand theirs. There are valid points on both sides, and being dismissive is the best way to show someone you are not marriage material. Story 28. Before he went crazy, Kanye did say it best. If you are not a punk, holler we want a prenuptial agreement, because when she leaves your ass, she will leave with half. He was right. Story 29. We have told our 2 daughters they cannot get married without a prenuptial agreement. We are fortunate to have built up a modest amount of wealth and want to protect it. Story 30. I feel it is fair. I am going to be a teacher next year, and the woman I am talking to has been a nurse for 2 years. If we got married now, I imagine she would want to protect her assets, and I believe it is only right on her part since she earned them before I came into the picture. Story 31. Marriage is indeed a lifelong relationship, and I agree that you should share everything with your wife. Not because she is entitled to it, but because you presumably love her and want to join your life to hers. However, when she becomes an ex-wife, she is entitled only to a share of the assets earned together during the marriage. She loses the privilege of your lifelong wealth when she stops being your lifelong partner. Story 32. As a woman and a lawyer, my first instinct would be to laugh and say, sure, but this is Scotland, not the United States of America. It is not worth the paper it is printed on. Then I would continue with my date. Story 33. I suggested a prenuptial agreement, also called a contracting out agreement, where I live when we were buying a house together. It came up naturally because of the buying process and mixing of assets. Where I live, if you live together for more than a few years, you are considered de facto partners, and the same laws around division of assets apply if you split. In our case, she has a much higher income and assets by a wide margin. My salary is above average, but she earns triple what I do. I tried to insist, but she did not want one. I suggested it again when we made our wills and when we got married, but she still did not want one. I think it helps that we are older and more mature than most couples first getting together. We trust each other completely. No matter what happens, neither of us is the type to take advantage or be vindictive. Story 34. My partner brought it up early because there is a 5 times difference between what we make. She said that she thought we had a long-term future and would be fully willing to sign an agreement. She said that even though she was not ready for that step, she wanted me to know so that I would not be scared off by the commitment. I have complete respect for the way she handled that. We are not married yet, but she was probably right. If we had not had that discussion, I would likely have left by now because my ex-wife took my cattle ranch and everything I have ever worked for, just to spend on drugs, live in a 24-foot camper, and ruin our children's future. That is a big scar to get past for me. Story 35, we talked about the pros and cons of it, the laws of our state, and she did some research on her own. She realized it is not for one person's benefit or the other, but rather to ensure that both of us are cared for should one of us become incapacitated and try to harm the other. Story 36. I think having a prenuptial agreement is probably the smart move. I also think having a sunset clause in the case of having a child is wise because when a child is involved, the circumstances change. Story 37. The same argument works the other way around. Since it is a lifelong relationship, she may as well sign it because it will never be used. I would not proceed with a woman who thinks like that. Run. Story 38. I do not know, but bringing it up within the first 3 to 5 dates is quite wild. Most women would probably see that as arrogant and condescending that early in getting to know someone. That is a conversation for much later when there is more trust built up, and you know each other much better. Story 39. Well, the real question is, does a woman deserve half of what you own? That is a tricky question. The one case in which I would wholeheartedly agree that she does would be if she took a career hit to take care of the children. Even then, it is messy. Obviously, a retired lawyer would have taken much more of a career hit than a retired barista. But what if the barista had studied in the field of law and abandoned her studies for the family? Should she be compensated based on what she has earned if her career as a barista would have developed linearly? Or should she be compensated based on what she might have earned had she not abandoned her education for her family? And what if the lawyer was close to burnout and miserable in her profession and would have wanted to take that career hit no matter what, even when there would not have been a family for her to focus on? Would it be fair that she be compensated as if she had continued to be a lawyer for 20 more years when she would have abandoned that career either way? What about a stay-at-home spouse when there are no children around? We do not need a partner to stay at home, so we could argue that she was having an easier life based on his income. On the other hand, maybe his career only took off because of the peace of mind her staying at home provided him. In the end, we cannot answer this question. Maybe not even for each individual. So you get what you can negotiate for. Story 40. I went out with a woman who said it is fair that a woman has the right to what a man had before marriage. In the United States, with the exception of 9 community property states, anything you had before marriage is not classified as marital property. Even inheritances received while you are married are not considered marital property. This applies in 41 of the 50 states in the United States. Your assets and money prior to being married remain yours in the event of a divorce. Only 10% of divorces result in alimony being awarded to either party. Inheritances are not considered marital property even while married. If you are not in a community property state, you do not need a prenuptial agreement to protect what you built prior to marriage. However, it can be useful if you move to one of the 9 states. Story 41. The girlfriend was fine with a prenuptial agreement. When I told my wife after I got home, she became very angry for some reason. Story 42. As a woman, I would sign it because wanting to marry that man means I love him and he loves me. I would add some clauses regarding cheating and domestic violence. Story 43. My wife agreed and it was never an argument. Unfortunately, she had debt, low income, and no assets while I had a house, savings, and would soon inherit some property. I felt I had a moral obligation to protect what I would inherit, at minimum for my family, and I had also witnessed my father be financially ruined by divorce. We negotiated amicably, and that was that. Anything one of us inherits cannot be taken in divorce. What each of us owned at the time of the marriage is documented and considered premarital, meaning it is not subject to division. There is also a cap on alimony. 2 of these protections would technically already be covered by existing divorce law, But the extra protection, spelling it all out and naming exact accounts, properties, and amounts helps. It has never affected us, and we still share finances. Though I have a separate individual retirement account for before marriage and one for after marriage, and inherited items remain only in my name. It is odd to me that prenuptial agreements have such a bad stigma, but more and more couples are getting married while keeping completely separate finances. I could not imagine splitting a dinner or grocery bill with my wife. Story 44. The best line I ever heard from a lawyer was, "No one is thinking about divorce when the sex is great and they are all in love." Story 45. When will women start viewing prenuptial agreements as their tools of security too? Everyone can make this conversation much smoother by negotiating to include clauses or stipulations they would like in the prenuptial agreement as well. Both parties should protect themselves always. Story 46. At first she got offended, but we ended up having a calm, rational conversation, and she agreed with the idea. If you are not grounded and mature enough to have that conversation when you are most in love, you both are not ready to be married. You will not be able to resolve issues if you hate each other later. It is not expecting the worst. It is preparing for it. It is also a test. Women love relationship tests, framed as one to see how well you can work together in difficult and uncomfortable situations. A good prenuptial agreement favors both partners because it clarifies what is important to each party, without spite influencing decisions. It also saves a significant amount on legal costs if a divorce occurs. It is a win for all involved. Story 47. To avoid wasting time while dating, I have tried to talk about it within the first 3 to 5 dates. Maybe it is just me, but this feels way too early in the dating process to have such a discussion. If I were on a third date and my date started talking about prenuptial agreements, it would send all kinds of red flags, like they care more about possessions than love and are very materialistic. However, I guess it depends on the circumstances. If it is a couple of 20-year-olds who are just starting their careers and have not amassed much, then I do not see the point. But if we are talking about people in their 40s or 50s, then I can understand why you would want to protect everything you have built up your whole life. Still, it feels like jumping the gun to me. I always felt like prenuptial agreements should have an expiration date, at least in terms of an amicable divorce. If you want a prenuptial agreement to protect against infidelity, by all means, have both parties sign the same clause to put everyone on equal footing. But you are building a life together, meant to be a partnership. Surely after some time, 10 or 20 years, your lives are one, and everything you have is shared between both of you. Having a major imbalance in the relationship due to income or wealth that is constantly used as leverage feels like a very unhealthy power dynamic to me. Story 48. I am ambivalent about this. On one hand, I can see why a woman would react poorly to the idea of a prenuptial agreement because it essentially says, "I don't trust you." The man may be perfectly rational while doing so, but for the woman, this does not necessarily bode well. On the other hand, it is not just honest women who may feel appalled by this, but dishonest gold diggers too, because it disrupts their plans. Ultimately, it is a judgment call. In your specific case, however, the woman you went on a date with revealed her true intentions. Her reasoning was not about your lack of trust, but that she felt entitled to assets you earned long before you met her. Besides, she immediately contradicted herself. If she thinks marriage is a lifelong commitment and you should share everything, the prenuptial agreement should not be an issue since it never becomes relevant anyway. Story 49. I was married before, and I stayed longer than I should have in a toxic relationship because I was worried about finances. That should never be the case, and it should not be an issue of having a prenuptial agreement or not. Prenuptial agreements are not there because you do not trust your partner. They are there because of knowledge and experience from a collective group of people. Trust me, you never want to learn that experience. Story 50. I believe that everything earned prior to getting married should not be split in the event of a divorce, but anything purchased or earned after marriage should be. Story 51. I was in a serious relationship for 2 years, and we were talking about marriage. I had no trouble with the concept. He had a lot more assets than me and children as well. Those kids were why we broke up, by the way. I posted about it. I have a lawyer, and when I said she would be involved, he got really weird. I looked at the prenuptial agreement he had ready, and there was no way I would agree to it. It did not just guarantee me nothing, it also would financially penalize me if I initiated a divorce. No wonder he did not want my lawyer looking at it. We were having other issues and I was over it, so in the end it did not matter. But I think if you own significant assets, then a prenuptial agreement makes sense, provided both parties have lawyers to represent their interests. Story 52. As a woman, it's fine. Many people don't understand that a legal prenuptial agreement would protect both parties. I have read some disturbing ones that cannot be legal, such as requiring a baby by a certain time in order to receive monetary compensation for being a stay-at-home wife for 10 years. That cannot be real, right? Story 53. As a woman, I am fine with signing a prenuptial agreement. My partner, who has been divorced twice, is equally fine not having one with me. We are determined not to need one. Story 54. I'm all for it but also against it if that makes sense. I do feel if one person brings, say, $1 million into the marriage and the other brings nothing financially, and they divorce, then the person who has nothing gets nothing. Obvious exceptions being any financial ventures taken up in both people's names after marriage are, of course, split. This is regardless of whether it's the man or woman who is wealthy or any partner. People get nasty and petty when a relationship breaks down and try to hurt each other, and going for someone's wallet is an easy way to do that. On the other hand, I can also agree with the argument that if you're committing to marrying someone, then you should trust them and not need a prenuptial agreement. Overall, I'm in favor of them. It doesn't show any distrust. It's just both parties protecting themselves in case things go badly. Story 55. Better safe than sorry. Bring it up and get it done. Make it balanced. Let her list what she wants included in the prenuptial agreement, such as a cheating clause or anything she would be okay with. It is an agreement and negotiation. Nothing shows commitment more than having a prenuptial agreement in place. Story 56. One for me and a warning for others. I was young and had nothing. As soon as I mentioned a contract for the wedding, they, in-laws and girlfriend, jumped down my throat, saying, "You are already thinking of leaving," etc. I left it. Long story short, she walked away with more than 50%. She contributed less than 2% during the marriage. She made huge debts numerous times. Guess who paid? I paid for everything. She knew she had the upper hand with no contract. She could act irresponsibly, which she did, and walk away with more than she would have ever earned. Yes, rookie mistake on my side. Story 57. My current wife is a lawyer and we are both comfortable. She was happy to sign the prenuptial agreement for many reasons, but mostly because my ex-wife is difficult, and we both agreed that we did not want the ex to have a chance to claim increased assets. My wife actually arranged everything and found a lawyer to represent me. We have treated everything as community property, so it really does not make a difference. Prenuptial agreements just establish the rules, and I am a fan. Story 58. I do the same. I share that I take care of my parents and siblings and cannot risk that for any relationship status. Of course, my ex did not respect that. Story 59. I was much better off than my wife when we started dating. After a month or two, I casually mentioned that there would be a prenuptial agreement if we were ever to marry. She chuckled and said, "Don't blame you. I went into the marriage with net assets greater than $600,000, and she went into the marriage with net assets less than negative $20,000. Story 60. I'm not a man, but I am all for prenuptial agreements. If you have a woman who has her own assets, she should not want to claim yours if things go wrong. Not wanting to sign a prenuptial agreement is a red flag, in my opinion. Story 61. As a woman, it would be a red flag for me if a man did not want a prenuptial agreement. If set up well, it makes everything easier in the case of divorce. Story 62. Marriage is a risk that is not worth the benefit, in my honest opinion. My girlfriend has been delaying for years about getting a prenuptial agreement, which was my condition for getting married since I would be taking on a more significant risk than her. I earn significantly more money and have a much higher net worth, and I would like to avoid retiring in poverty while she benefits from my work for free should she decide to divorce. Do not let anyone manipulate or coerce you into thinking protection for yourself and her in the future is not in both of your best interests. There is no good reason to refuse a mutual agreement prior to consenting to something as significant as marriage. Story 63. Woman here. I could not marry someone who did not sign a prenuptial agreement. If you have assets prior to the marriage, you need to ring-fence them from marital assets and protect yourself, as should your partner. Prenuptial agreements are fairly standard and apply to both men and women, especially when both parties enter the marriage with their own property. However, if your partner has no assets, does not intend to work, and will rely solely on you financially, there should be provisions to ensure they have financial security if the marriage dissolves. Story 64. I do not know how old you are, but I am in my 40s. Any woman who does not want a prenuptial agreement if they are at all established in their careers is making a poor decision. I do not have much, but I have a substantial 401k, a pension, and a modest house. I am in a relationship where marriage is not out of the question. He is more traditional than I am. I would get married only with a prenuptial agreement. What is mine is mine. I do not understand why women do not also want to protect themselves. I have a friend who has made significant advances in her career since she was married at 24. The only reason she has not left her narcissistic husband is that she does not want to pay him. Tell your girlfriend to look at Haley. She just sold her business for $1 billion and did not have a prenuptial agreement. She now has to pay him if she leaves. Women forget that they are capable and can achieve great things, but they can end up at a disadvantage in a divorce. Story 65. If it is easy depends on the situation. If both parties are expected to keep working and share household responsibilities equally, then a prenuptial agreement should not be a problem. To each their own. That is not always the case though. When my sister got married, her husband wanted a prenuptial agreement because he recently started a business with a couple of friends, and he wanted to protect the business in case of divorce. His suggestion was that the business and its earnings should be held separately in case of divorce. My sister countered with the suggestion that the business itself could be held separately, but not the earnings. That is what they finally agreed on. The point was that the business was so demanding that he was rarely home for several years. My sister took almost all responsibility for the home and children. That meant she was over 40 when she could start focusing more on her work and have something resembling a career. She lost a lot of money doing that, but she made it possible for him to earn a lot by taking care of his home and children. It is only fair that she got a share of the earnings in the divorce because those earnings would not have been possible without her. Receiving part ownership of the company would have caused major issues for the company and the other owners. Having an owner who does not like another owner is a problem, so excluding the company itself was fair to everyone involved. If you are a team as well as a couple, then there is no my money and your money because you earn together. When investments are involved, old money is part of making new money, so there is no obvious mine and yours. Plus, I would hate to ever wonder if finances are part of my wife's reasons for staying in our marriage. If someone stays in a marriage in order to have access to money, she is not a wife. She is a nanny, a housekeeper, and a prostitute. I do not want that for my companion in life. Story 66. I am a woman, so please disregard if you do not want the female input. I have not been in this situation, but I am a fan of legal matters being sorted, so I will likely discuss or get a prenuptial agreement before I marry. It also depends on who I end up with. Overall, I have seen it go both ways in my peer group. People who have something worth protecting will bring this up, while those who are not quite there yet financially or emotionally do not think about it as much. Some women have an expectation that they will be taken care of in a relationship. This is not a judgment on whether that is right or wrong. It is just how they were raised or their personality. A prenuptial agreement or being with a man who essentially refuses to take care of them fully can be a rude wake-up call. This type of person may not be an ideal fit if you are sure you want a prenuptial agreement unless they are willing to do the work and shift their mindset. If I date someone like this and they refuse to have a prenuptial agreement, I would be concerned about our respective expectations for the partnership. For me, a prenuptial agreement is a risk management document for a situation I hope will never arise. But if our fundamental views on how the relationship finances will work differ, for example, if they believe they will be taken care of by me as the primary caretaker, the day-to-day will be a challenge. Some women I know are too far ahead on the independent scale to care about money that is not their own, and they are the ones bringing up prenuptial agreements to their boyfriends. They usually do well in their careers or have inheritances, so I know that can be intimidating for some men, which is a whole different issue. Story 67. Well, I think the reality is that when you get married, you are signing a marriage certificate. Essentially, you are agreeing to the terms of a pre-designated prenuptial agreement that most people use unless you create your own prenuptial agreement. Make no mistake, you already have a prenuptial agreement that will be decided in court or through mutual agreement. The only difference is whether you have decided these terms before marriage or, in the case of divorce, decide them afterward. It definitely becomes a more complicated situation as time passes and you accumulate joint accounts, pool money together, and buy things jointly. That is when having a prenuptial agreement becomes much more valuable and easier to manage. Story 68. More people need to research prenuptial agreements and not take them personally. Movies and television shows portray them negatively. Story 69. Mine is a bit different. She has always been a hard worker and very independent until we met. Now she likes the idea of building a life together, while still realizing that assets can transfer through marriage, and sometimes it is best that they do not. She owns some land in another country. Her big life plan is to have people farm the land, herd animals, or grow crops on it. She will then collect a small royalty as passive income, like a revenue share. I told her that I support that, but I do not want to be part of it. Even if we marry, I want separate properties. While I do not expect us to get divorced, life is unpredictable. In the event of a divorce, I would not want to have a share of that deal. In return, I own property domestically, and I want to be sure that whatever I own and have worked for before the marriage will remain mine during and potentially after. This approach does not mean I do not want to build a life with her. We will still have a shared expense account for daily needs, food, children's supplies, cleaning products, and so on. But we will simultaneously maintain our own finances. She was surprisingly very okay with it and said that was her plan all along. Story 70. Woman here. I wanted a prenuptial agreement with my partner when we got married. The way I think about it is that I wanted us to decide how assets are divided if we divorce when we are still in love and want to treat each other fairly and kindly. I would have had a problem having no rights to assets he brought into the marriage only if my husband had expected me to stop working and cut off my source of income. In that case, it would have been important to my financial security and seen as a safety measure to avoid getting financially trapped in a marriage. Story 71. It went well. They signed it while crying. I just lost $140,000 in a divorce and was not going to do that again. Story 72. Not assigned male at birth, but I'm getting married later this year and my fiancé, and I have been upfront about prenuptial agreements from the start due to both of our parents being divorced. We couldn't be more in love with each other. But we are mature enough to know that life is unpredictable and anything could happen. Story 73. I'm not even sure if I want to get married. I come from divorced parents and knew many kids with divorced parents growing up. I don't want children, so what is the point? Funnily enough, both my parents say 100% prenuptial agreement if I ever get married. Story 74. Then she is unwise. Premarital assets are not considered marital property and are therefore not eligible for division upon divorce. Story 75. The United States divorce rate is about 50%. Pride and greed are what I feel are the underlying reasons for being against them. The reality is marriages end in divorce a lot, and no one should be entitled to things they did not justly earn. Story 76. I would be glad if they brought it up first. I am worth much more than anyone I have dated, so it would be a stress relief. However, based on local laws, the only way to protect premarital assets is to remain unmarried, which is what I will do. Story 77. Not a man, but out of curiosity, when you mention the prenuptial agreement, does your mind go to a divorced couple or divorced parents? These are two fundamentally different things. If you are a business owner, that is your empire. Sign it. If you want a stay-at-home mom who does not work, but you want to make all the money for the family, including her, then she will need money to support herself as well as the children. Include clauses regarding infidelity and other matters, but we need to consider these circumstances during these conversations. Story 78. I am not a man, but I would not have a problem with a prenuptial agreement as long as he does not either. Otherwise, he is just a hypocrite. Story 79. As a woman who earns more than most men, I would be thrilled if my partner brought up prenuptial agreements. People who get upset about prenuptial agreements are usually those who are financially less secure. It has nothing to do with gender. Story 80. I haven't done it, but I definitely will. If she says no, it's a huge red flag because she is planning on leaving with half your belongings. Story 81. I do not have enough assets for it to matter, but I would not marry someone where I would even consider that it would be necessary. Many people who focus on prenuptial agreements view their relationships as transactional and do not actually understand the law regarding how assets are handled during a divorce. Story 82. My wife and I met early in our careers, not long out of college, when we both had a negative net worth, so there was nothing to prenup. I barely even owned any furniture. It was a non-issue. But if something were to happen that led to me being single and dating again at my age, first off, I would be devastated because I love my wife. Hypothetically speaking, in that situation, I honestly do not think I would ever marry again. I have a net worth in the millions and children, and I simply would not risk letting another woman have access to those assets. Especially if I were to lose my wife, I know her wishes would be for our net worth to be reserved for our children. I would create a trust for the children, and then date and even have long-term relationships, but probably not remarry. Story 83. Why are prenuptial agreements only for men to have and women to sign? Many women today earn more than men. When I got married, my husband and I had about the same income, but I made more money. Throughout our marriage, we worked together to achieve the highest household income, so everything we have, we built together. This is how marriage should be. A prenuptial agreement is a good idea for both people to have if you are entering a marriage with unequal assets. It protects premarital assets and shows the person with fewer assets how they will be treated if the relationship ends early. Story 84. As a non-American, it is odd to me that the concept of assets gained before marriage not being split in the event of divorce is not the norm. Story 85. I am a woman. I have been with my partner since we were young, but I still want a prenuptial agreement. Not that I want to break up with her or anything, but I have seen my parents' situation, and I promise myself I will never let money be the reason for me to stay if anything happens. So, that concern comes from my parents' experience, not from a lack of trust in my partner. Story 86. I am not a man. I think it is a good idea, but my male partner does not want to. All of the significant assets currently belong to him. I do not plan on getting divorced once I get married, but I would like a clear plan for our marriage and a contingency plan. Story 87. I am single, 22 years old female, currently dating around, and usually I bring up the topic first. I am completely in favor of the prenuptial agreement and postnuptial agreement in certain situations. It is a red flag if they are not willing to consider it, in my opinion. Obviously, as with all things, there is potential for abuse. But for the most part, I think these agreements can be very useful means of protection for both parties if used correctly. Story 88. It is truly based on the unique relationship between two individuals, and what a party might prefer, want, or need can vary for each person depending on the connection between them and their individual characteristics. Story 89. I am serious, but why not just choose not to get married? I started dating my wife when we were completely equal. We have both grown, and despite me earning much more, she has been there every step of the way and made sacrifices to help me get to where I am. She carried and gave birth to my children. She deserves everything I earn. If that is not the case and you do not feel she deserves half, then why get married? A prenuptial agreement in many cases is a false shield. Courts dislike them, and divorce lawyers enjoy challenging them. If you have no reason to believe she will deserve half of your life, then why get married? It is almost guaranteed to cause problems later in life if you do not see yourselves as equal partners from the start. Story 90. Honestly, I know this is an emotional reaction, but their staunch refusal gives me my own emotional response and begins to label the woman as a gold digger at worst and willingly ignorant at best. Either she is an idiot who truly believes that most marriages never approach divorce despite all the facts saying otherwise, or she knows the marriage will likely end in divorce and is trying to take what I earned before I even knew her. Neither possibility makes me want to marry that woman. Story 91. You should look up what she would be entitled to without a prenuptial agreement in your jurisdiction and get some legal advice on this. Often, what people think they own and what they actually own are not the same. Story 92. That's great, but getting married is not a lifelong relationship anymore. Women initiate the overwhelming majority of divorces, and they can do so for any or no reason. If they have not been in it for the long haul, then they should not get access to the proceeds of the long haul. The above is obviously also applicable in reverse, the few times I have seen high net worth women marry less well-off men. Story 93. Fortunately, my wife just cared about getting married, and that was my one request before proposing. It goes away after 10 years. I hope I can make it that long. Story 94. It's a lifelong relationship, and they should share everything. If it's a lifelong relationship, then there is no issue with her signing, is there? Prenuptial agreements and paternity tests are a good measure of how biased against men a woman is. If she is not planning or currently undermining him, then there is really no reason for her to object. Story 95. My partner, who is divorced, mentioned wanting a prenuptial agreement. I am a bit hesitant because we also want children, and having children will definitely impact my career. My job requires traveling by plane at least once a month and even working in freezers at -20 to -40 degrees Celsius, which is very stressful. I would likely need to take sick leave early in the pregnancy, which my boss would not appreciate and could harm my chances of promotion. We concluded that if we have children, we would create another legal agreement to grant me compensation for the toll pregnancy would take on my career. Honestly, I was not thrilled that we haven't even gotten married yet, and he was already thinking about a potential divorce. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.